Hello and welcome to episode 169 of the Rollo and Slappy Show. Today is November 4th, 2019. I am Rollo McFlugel, and with me is Slappy Jones 2, and we are both from McFlugel.com. Show notes page for this episode will be McFlugel.com/169, where we will link to things we talk about in this episode, as well as ways to check out the podcast and to check out LibertyMugs.com, our sponsor, where you can buy awesome libertarian-themed mugs. And just as a follow-up from last week, once again, I did not get any trick-or-treaters at my house, so that makes 4 years, 0 cumulative trick-or-treaters. So maybe next year.
Candy?
Yes. I had good candy, too.
Good. We didn't have that many. I didn't go through all my candy, and we did run out of candy last year, so I bought extra this year. And we had fewer trick-or-treaters, so lots of candy for me.
There it is. Well, maybe you can have my candy, too.
Sure. I'll stop by.
All right. So why don't you introduce our episode? I think we've kind of covered it before, and I'll link to it.
Yeah. Oh, you are going to link to it. I thought we were going to kind of bury that one and pretend it never happened.
Well, we need to put some links on our show notes page.
Okay.
Make it seem like, you know.
Yeah, so it's a topic we've covered in the past before, a long time ago.
Way back in episode 27.
Yeah. I haven't re-listened to it, so I don't know what we said. I didn't even remember that we did it. Rollo reminded me. So I don't know what it's like. I don't know what our arguments were. Maybe they've changed since then. Maybe I should go back and listen and see what we were saying back then. But we're going to talk about is Christianity compatible with libertarianism, or libertarianism compatible with Christianity? Because we do see articles pop up from time to time and tweets, people on Twitter saying they are completely incompatible, and how can you can't be a libertarian and a Christian. And obviously Rollo and I are, and we don't think we are living with contradictions or too many or whatever. I don't know. I don't know.
At least not in this case.
Not in this. Yeah, maybe in other places, but not. I do think that Christianity and libertarianism is compatible. In fact, I think if you're a Christian, you would have to be a libertarian. So why don't we? Where do you want to start with this?
It's a good question. Maybe just about.
So what's
ourselves.
an argument? Okay, sure. Why would you say that Christianity is compatible with libertarianism?
Well, here's one of the things. Maybe I'll answer this in a kind of a roundabout way. At least one of the ways that I came to libertarianism and eventually, the anarchism that we believe in now. When I was first, I've been a Catholic all my life, and as you get older, I'm 31 years old, so still relatively. Yeah, but relatively young, especially in my adulthood. For most of my life, for anybody's life, especially through adolescence, teenage years, and even early adulthood, you have certain beliefs that you have just because you've had them growing up.
Yeah.
And so there's this kind of long discovery process of what you really believe in and who you are. So I was baptized Catholic as a baby and practiced all my life. And as you get older, you start to understand things better and question things. And I think I tried for a long time, even when I was younger, not to just blindly believe what I believed. And as I was mature enough and just, I guess, mature enough to start asking questions, I would pursue my own faith and try to figure out what was going on. And then kind of a similar thing happened with my political ideologies as I started, reading more stuff and being exposed to more things. My eyes were getting opened, and I started going down this path towards libertarianism. And as I was doing that, discovering things like the non-aggression principle and economics and ethics, I would kind of put different beliefs next to each other, juxtapose them and see, all right, do these work out? Because I kind of had that feeling that if things are inconsistent, then something's wrong. And so that was one of the things I remember. I would try to debate people, argue with people in politics and end up realizing that I was like making some weird arguments sometimes. Weird as in wrong and incorrect and inconsistent. So I would try to correct that. And so I would put different things next to each other and see if they made sense, and kind of whittling in this certain direction towards non-aggression, peace, all this kind of good libertarian stuff. And I was kind of worried for a little bit. So I'm like, well, what's this going to do about, my faith as a Catholic?
Mm-hmm.
But what I realized was that the libertarian ideals and the Catholic ideals were complementing each other. And they were making me arrive at the same place. That, don't commit aggression against people that are not doing harm against you, and loving your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You were reaching the same conclusion from two very different approaches. And to me, when you're able to do that, it strengthens the arguments of both things. If you're saying that there's a truth out there somewhere, and you're able to start from completely different places and kind of apply somewhat different rule sets or philosophies or whatever, and you wind up at the same place, that should give you some confidence that what you're arriving at is correct. And doing that with libertarianism and my Catholicism and Christianity was one of those things that worked out that way. And it continues to work out that way as I explore even more deeply. A good example, and we covered this in a past episode, maybe a month or two ago. The latest chapter in my economics libertarianism thing is with, hard sound money with Bitcoin, and going back and reading De Moneda by Nicholas Erasme. I'm saying that right.
Yeah, I don't know.
It was very big for him to say that, like, this is not only economically it's important, but also religiously important from a perspective of, the rules of God, hard money, people who cheat in the money system are being very, very sinful. And, it lined up pretty well. The things you would do for good economics were the same thing that you would do for good things for your soul.
Mm-hmm.
So as I continue to go deeper, I'm finding deeper and deeper congruencies. So that's kind of my perspective of it. I don't know.
Yeah,
if you have
I had a similar story, similar track in that. I guess I was, even in college, I was always a registered Republican when I was young, and supported Republican stuff. But then I heard some arguments from some of my college liberal friends that were pretty compelling, mainly war. And it made me think, like, maybe I should be a Democrat. Maybe that's the right way to go. And you start questioning things, and I was questioning religion and everything. And then we were actually just talking about this before we went on, but Red Hazlitt, long story behind that, I guess, but Red Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson and a couple other books. And I thought, wow, this is it. This is what's making sense. And that actually strengthened my Catholicism as well, because it all fit in perfectly with that and started to make the religion make more sense, because it was something I didn't really question too much when I was young. You just kind of have it around you and you live it, whatever. And I didn't start questioning it much until I was a little older. When I say little older, like late teens, early 20s. But then when I started reading about libertarianism, it actually made my religion make a lot more sense to me. So it actually strengthened my religion. And so that's why I find it interesting. There's a good amount of people out there who say they're incompatible.
Yeah, you hear a lot from the libertarian side.
I don't know. Yeah, go ahead. I just cut you off there.
Sorry, I was sneezing halfway through that. What's the one slogan that some libertarians say? Like no,
God,
no rulers, no gods.
Yeah.
Or something else, and that kind of. I think that kind of, well, that's one of the things it comes from. It's like, well, how can you be a Christian when God violates the non-aggression principle? And I'm like, well, first of all,
Well, it's for non-aggression principle is for I mean it's a way to act between people.
Right. I mean, that's my first kind of thing, which may not be very satisfying to people, but it's like God and humans don't exactly operate on the same realm.
Yeah, and if you don't believe in God, then obviously that's not going to convince you. But
yeah, it's like we are not the same as God. We're not on the same level as God, and to say otherwise is being pretty presumptuous, and also it's basically original sin is trying to act on the same plane as God. I mean, humans are made in the image and likeness of God, but we are not the same as God. The most obvious, and of course, again, if you're an atheist and don't believe in God, then you're going to sit here and say, well, I don't believe that, but that's fine. I'm not trying to convince you to become a Christian. This is general for any of this. I'm not trying to convince any atheist to become a Christian. All I'm doing is,
or any non-Christians to be Christians, right, for that matter.
The one thing I would be saying is any non-tractor believer to start buying tractors.
Sure. Well, one thing I just wanted to throw in there too. A lot of these people who are arguing, saying they're incompatible, I don't know which Christians they're hearing from, and there's certainly a ton of Christians who I disagree strongly with a lot of stuff, and I would say they're not being real compatible with Christianity as well. So,
sure.
Yeah, I mean, take our arguments for our arguments, and not throw in whatever your evangelical friend said.
Yeah. I knocked myself off my train of thought there. We're made in the image and likeness of God, that we are not God. Do you know where I was?
No, I totally cut you off and forgot.
Ah.
But I thought the reason I did cut you off is I thought you were going to go on for a while with what you were about to say, and I just wanted to throw that out there before we get started.
Maybe this is God trying to helping me,
should we
intervening.
Should we pause and edit?
No, this was God intervening because he was like, "You're about to say something stupid, so I'm going to erase whatever your mind was in your mind."
You were talking about tractors for a second.
Yeah, I think that's what finally was the knockout punch. No, but I mean, even kind of, this wasn't the point, but what we're saying is not, we're not trying to convince anyone to become a Christian. We're just saying what our
No, but what I will say is that if you are a Christian, you probably should be a libertarian if you follow Christ's teaching.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay.
I not that, but I remember now. Because we're made in the image and likeness of God, but we are not the same as God. And kind of the big proof that we are not the same as God is that God created us. In one way or the other. I'm not going to try to get into a discussion about how God created the universe. That doesn't really matter. But as long as you believe that God was the ultimate catalyst in the creation of the universe and everything that we know, then right there you have to say that, like, well, that's a different kind of relationship between the creator and the created, and then the created among the created. That there would be different rules that are being that are set between that. Does that make, like?
Yeah.
It's like you can there's some degree of ownership if you create something,
right?
Or just give the ability for someone to live, like your pets. There's a much different relationship between you and your pets and you and other people. Why is that? Well, because you can own pets, you can't own people. So it's kind of not saying that God. Well, you can say that God kind of owns us since he created us, and so he would be within his rights to set out certain rules for us to.
That's where your favorite topic of free will comes in.
Yeah. So it's reasonable for. And yeah, that's the thing where people say, well, he's a really hateful, vengeful God because he says he creates you and then says, live by these rules or else you're going to be banished to eternal hellfire. Well, why can't he do that? Like, is it like, I don't really know what else to say to it.
Yeah, I don't know how that would be. How believing that is incompatible with libertarianism.
Sure.
Now, one thing Thaddeus Russell always says is that if you're a Christian, then you want to have universal truths, and you want to force this on everybody. And that's why we have wars to go spread Christianity to save these people, because if they're going to go to hell if they don't believe, wouldn't that justify going in with guns to convert them to save them? I may not have. I tried to do that argument fairly, and I don't think he would disagree with that, because I've heard him say similar things many times. That because you believe in a universal truth, then everyone needs to. Right. And that's where I talk. I mean, at least for Catholicism, is the free will is important in there because. Christ, as far as I know, again, I'm not, I don't have scripture memorized. I don't know every single passage, but I've never heard him say to use force to convert people. It's more go about and do good deeds.
Like so many other things, when you combine religion and the state, the religion is the thing that gets bastardized pretty quickly. So, I would think that a lot of wars were fought kind of under the guise of religion, and it really had a lot to do with power, political power, and the religion was the thing that was used to kind of rouse the troops up a little bit. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
Because we certainly can't find anything from the actual religion.
What about missionaries?
What about them?
I don't know. That's what people say. They go around the world and I guess preach Catholicism or Christianity or whatever.
Sure. Well, I mean,
I don't think they use force.
Well, it's funny because people criticize religion and Christianity for the things that certain people do. And if there's a missionary going around and like being aggressive and
withholding food from people and
right.
saying convert, or if you don't convert, you don't eat.
Yeah.
That would be a problem.
Yes. And
that would be a problem with Christianity. Like that person would not be living as a Christian.
Right. So it's kind of like cherry picking these certain bad actors in there and saying, well, no, let's ignore what the actual, religion teaches, things that are generally accepted among people, and just look at what this guy does. It would be the same as saying that someone coming around saying, well, Bill Weld says this, and so you libertarians believe this. It's like, no, Bill Weld's not a good libertarian.
Right.
Get away from me with that garbage. That I'm have to be accountable to what Bill Weld does and says. Like if you use that argument that you pick some random person that calls himself a Christian and attribute whatever they do to all of Christianity, then you have no leg to stand on when someone criticizes you because of what Bill Weld or any other lunatic that happens to take the name libertarian and says dumb stuff with it. Like it's such a stupid, dumb argument.
Right. I mean, if anyone should understand that, it would be libertarians.
Right. That's why I find it confusing sometimes.
Yeah.
Or surprising that they revert to these things that would otherwise get them so torqued up and rightfully so, because it is an annoying thing to say to somebody.
Right. It's hard to even, we've talked about this before, but it's hard to use the term libertarian when you're talking to people who aren't libertarian, because it means something. You don't know what it's going to mean to them.
Right. Yeah. So
it's like kind of Republican who likes drugs.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. Ayn Rand follower. Who knows? Everyone has these definitions that we would argue all day on what a libertarian is.
Yeah. But I want to get back real quick to what I mentioned, because I think some people would kind of be like, well, that doesn't make sense, or that's kind of nasty or mean. When I said that, God has the right to banish us to hell if we don't follow his rules. And it's like, well, if that's what he wants to do, it's like, that's not an argument that God's not a libertarian. You can say that that's mean or nasty, and you don't like that God's doing that. You don't like
it, or you don't want to believe it, or you don't, or I don't mean, you say whatever you want.
But it would be like saying that it's not libertarian for a person to not let someone. So you're not a libertarian if you decide to make a rule that people wearing blue shirts are not allowed in your house. Just because you don't like the way someone uses their property does not make what they're doing anti-libertarian or something. So your understanding of free will and heaven and hell and the rules that God set out, you may not like them, but that doesn't mean that it's contrary to certain libertarian ethos. And again, that's not going to make someone say, well, okay, well, I agree with God's decision to have a heaven and hell. But that's not what I'm trying to do. All I'm trying to do is show that it's not against any sort of libertarian idea.
To hold those beliefs.
Right. Again, it's just something that you don't agree with.
And right. And I mean, on top of that, just because libertarians follow the non-aggression principle, maybe I'm messing this argument up, because I don't really follow that argument that they say God doesn't follow the non-aggression principle, therefore believing in God is not libertarian, because you're not violating the non-aggression principle. It's only between human interaction. As long as I don't violate the non-aggression principle, how is that not libertarian?
I know. Yeah. Well, I think you have a hard time understanding, because it's just not a good argument.
Yeah. It's like I just don't get it.
If your dog steals food off the table or something, you don't say that the dog violated the non-aggression principle, do you?
Right. It's kind of what dogs do.
Right.
And like your point exactly. Like, I might not like what you do with your property. I might have a problem with it. That doesn't make you any less libertarian.
Right. And also at the same time, I'm not trying to say that, God is the creator, therefore the owner, therefore he can do whatever he wants to us, is a satisfactory answer to that question, because I don't think it is. But I'm just saying, on the pure libertarian technicalities of that it doesn't violate any sort of principles. I think it's more complicated and, more mysterious about what God's will is, or not his will, but what's going on there. I don't even know that I'm very well equipped to answer that, or at least to have a great discussion about it right now. All I'm saying is that it's that argument doesn't hold water based on their own boundaries they're setting and conditions for it.
What about the argument that these religions, and maybe specifically Catholics and Catholicism, have been so bad all through history? The Spanish Inquisition or the Crusades, and that's why I don't like religion or God or whatever.
Sure. I mean,
because again, like that point when we were talking about missionaries, like I don't know I don't have a specific case. Like, if a missionary goes to another country and talks about Christ, and people want to learn, is that not libertarian? Even though they're going somewhere else and maybe it's a different culture and they have their own beliefs, but if someone is finds it interesting and wants to learn, maybe they do get stuff out of it. Maybe they get food and drink out of it. I don't know. Is that not libertarian? But to the point where you said if they were withholding food, unless you got baptized, we're not going to feed you, and you're poor and we have all this food here. If you want to get the food, all you got to do is get baptized and start practicing. That would not be Christian, and that's what I would say about some of those things in history that the church has done. It's not the faith, it's people.
And we always say this with all sorts of things. You have to look at it. You can't look at everything in the past with the lens of today. You can look at things from the past with the lens of today to identify and say like, well, yeah, and acknowledge, yes, what they did back then was wrong. But to sit there and be like, these people were therefore evil and we should take, listen to nothing. Well, they didn't understand. They don't have the hindsight of history and the accumulative knowledge that we have to make the same judgments that we are today back then. It's just like, we can look back, 200 years ago and look at plenty of practices and say like, oh, these people were idiots and such barbaric people for doing X, Y, Z. Well, guess what? In the next 100 years, people are going to look back to the time today and look at things that we do that we believe are perfectly normal and perfectly okay and say, look at these idiots, look at how barbarous they were for thinking that was normal. That's why we should be constantly, looking at what we do and trying to figure out what's going on and making sure that we're not being that way. And so always improving ourselves. But, it's this, there's this arrogance about, whatever the current time frame is, that we're like so much smarter and better than these people. Well, I guarantee if you were born at that time, that you wouldn't be thinking the same things ethically today as you would be back then. You'd probably be a lot like the other people. And even, let's take the case of, 200 years ago. Well, it's one of the big things that was going on in this country that would be judged as very bad is slavery. A guy like Lysander Spooner and the other abolitionists, what those guys were saying was not like common knowledge. They were saying things that were, not exactly taken as oh yeah, well that makes perfect sense with just at first glance. It was something they were changing the game a little bit. And so it's kind of a similar way today. Where libertarians can look at themselves as the abolitionists of government and seeing how it's like, yes, this makes perfect sense to us, but why isn't anybody else understanding it? Do you look at your parents or your brothers and sisters, or your husbands and wives, or your family, other family members and friends? Thanksgiving is going to be later on in this month. Are you going to look at them and say like these people are statists, therefore they're like the most evil people in the world? Because
Right.
Because if you should, then like Lysander Spooner's parents, if they were okay with slavery, should he have been doing the same thing? Or, back then, Lysander Spooner had to live in a world with slavery, and if he associated with people that believed slavery was okay, was he like an awful person for doing that? Like, does it make sense what I'm trying
Absolutely.
to say there?
No, I hear you.
So, the same. I got off on without talking about, but it's the same thing happens with Christianity. Yeah, we can acknowledge what they did was wrong, but it doesn't throw everything else out.
Right.
It just means they were going through a process of discovery, just like we are today.
Right.
And just because you have the ability to have this accumulative knowledge, just because of a coincidence of time when you were born, doesn't make you some special person that you can look at the mistakes people made in the past and say, well, I'm better than they are. So therefore, whatever they were talking about with their religion, I don't have to follow. Because guess what? People are going to be doing the same exact thing to you sometime in the future.
Oh, of course.
If they're not already doing it to you now.
Right. The other thing is that I don't know what Christian teachings are not libertarian. At least Christ's teaching is not libertarian. Because libertarianism is just very simply non-aggression principle.
Yeah.
So it's not a moral. I mean, I guess it's kind of a moral code.
Well,
but it's like the bare minimum.
I have a friend of mine who's an atheist, and we used to talk a lot about religion and everything. And he said to me, he's like, look, funny. He was like, if I have kids, I'm probably going to send them to the Quaker school because I like the way that they do things. And he said, I think the Gospels are great books. I think what's in there is wonderful. He just doesn't buy, doesn't
believe in God.
Right. But he can at least acknowledge that those messages are good in the Gospels.
I think it's hard to say they're not. Now, you can certainly say people haven't lived them or people have used them to do bad things.
Sure. Yeah, it's like we can look at the scandal with the sex abuse in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And, it's for all the things that went wrong there, all the evils that happened, absolutely open to criticism. But show me the teaching in the church that says that stuff was
That's okay or acceptable.
It's not there. So, criticize the application of the Christianity or the Catholicism, and especially if people are calling themselves Christians and everything, and acting like people should follow their lead while they're doing evil. Absolutely, they should be called out and criticized. But call out and criticize the contradiction. Don't start throwing punches out of bounds. So another point, unless you had something else.
No, go ahead.
One of the things I think is not often talked about, but I think should kind of be addressed, is that so Christians or anyone who has a religion who's a non-atheist, they kind of get mocked and made fun of, and so oh, you believe in this imaginary guy in the sky, blah 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 blah. Oh, look at how stupid you are. But what religion does, and not just Christianity, any sort of religion, it informs you on how you should live the good life and what your morals should be. And I don't think that should be taken for granted, because if you don't have that, then where do you get it from? Because you can't say libertarianism, because like you said, libertarianism is the non-aggression principle. And Tom Woods has said this in the past, and I love it when he says it, that there are people that, want to act like libertarianism is the only thing you need in life. But he said, if you live your whole life and at the end of it, you say well, I'm such a great person because I never violated anybody else's rights. You really want to pat yourself on the back for that?
Are you fulfilled? Did you live a fulfilling life? Maybe.
Yeah, but probably not. There's, we're get chemical rewards for actually doing things instead of just abstaining from doing things usually. So
yeah, really. I mean, you could sit in your literally sit in your mom's basement your whole life and never violate the non-aggression principle.
Right. Does that make you a good person? Probably not. So the absence of a religion, kind of giving you information about truth in the world and how you should act and morality. When you don't have that, that's not something that you should just really kind of brush aside. If you're an atheist, where do you develop that? Where does that come from? Where do you derive that truth? And I'm not saying that no one can do that. But I think it's important to kind of reflect on that, because I don't know where you would. And I'm not saying that anyone who's an atheist is therefore just an awful person who just lives an aimless life. But where does that? Why are you living your life the way you are? And even if you don't believe in God, you can't deny that a lot of your culture and a lot of the things you believe in were formed from these Judeo-Christian values.
Mm-hmm.
In the Western world, at least, and in other places of the world, if you
we probably don't have libertarianism without Christianity.
Sure.
Christianity was valuing people.
Mm-hmm. But there's even other I don't want to, disparage other religions and everything. I don't know that Buddhism or Hinduism would result in a violent state if left to its own devices, or even Islam has. I've defended Islam a little bit in the past with the same things where it's like, well, I don't understand it. Like, I know that there's plenty of peaceful Muslims out there, and I don't understand the Quran or the intricacies of Islam enough to be able to
even comment on it.
Right. But I do know that the vast majority of Muslims are peaceful people that are not out to hurt anyone. So, and I know from my own frustrations with people trying to tell me what Christianity is.
Or libertarianism, for that matter. How many articles on Slate do you read about libertarianism that are just not even close to right?
So if a Muslim tells me, no, Islam is a religion of peace, I don't have much reason to say, well, no, it's not, because they could just they'll turn around and say, well, dude, these terrorist groups and theocracies out there, it's just a
that's not Islam. Yeah,
right. It's just like if
someone, I don't know. I am not educated on Islam very well, so
yeah, neither am I. And that's just what I'm saying. Is that I don't have enough information to disprove what they're saying, because I know that the same arguments could be applied to Christianity and libertarianism that would be applied to Islam, that would be used to criticize it and say that it's evil or bad, then and I can easily disprove them from my own thing, and these other people are acting like they can disprove it for Islam, then what right do I have to say, well, no, in this situation it's different just because because it's a different religion. That's not to say I believe that all religions are on equal footing, because I am one religion and not
right.
all the others. But I think that the kind of the least common denominator in all this stuff is the state instead of the religion, or certain aspects of religion. So, I just think that the culture that you live in, especially when has a lot to do with the religion that developed there, or not developed there, but that has been practiced for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and is being living in that cultural place, that you're necessarily, just because you exist there in that environment, you're going to adopt certain values that were formed from certain religious teachings, to just say that religion is stupid and there's nothing to get from it, while you're holding values that were gleaned from that religion, even if you don't follow or believe in that religion explicitly. I think it's kind of presumptuous on your part to say that it's unnecessary and unneeded, when you're very likely benefiting and using a lot of the things from it. I think it's very arrogant to act like you are forming your own judgments and opinions from square one without any help from others. So, and someone might fire back, and if you do if someone says, no, you're wrong, this is where this all kind of comes from, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, one more point I want to, at least one more, I don't know how long you want to go. What about people who often talk about the contradictions in the Bible? A lot of times they have to do with Old Testament versus New Testament. Look at what Leviticus says here, or Deuteronomy.
Sure.
And then compare that to, the Beatitudes.
Yeah, I mean,
or the Ten Commandments, and then when Christ is asked what's the most important commandment, he doesn't name any of them.
right.
So what are you talking about? Like, there's contradictions all over the place.
Yeah, well, I mean, humans are fallible and they mess up and they do the wrong thing. And I think that there's probably certain times, really in the Old Testament, where the things that certain people did that were wrong were kind of justified through putting a religious aspect into it. A lot of it was trying to get people trying to get a message that made sense to people at that time. Again, we have the benefit of the collective history and knowledge of the past to be able to, distinguish right and wrong. These things are not, one all at once. You're not going to come in and convince people that are doing all sorts of crazy things that, let me tell you all these things, and you're going to, do a 180 on a dime and do all this other stuff. It takes time to change cultures and practices and beliefs. So I can't fault, certain things for not happening instantly. And then the other thing is the more important thing is, if you want to talk about these contradictions, like, some part in the Bible it said like slavery's okay, and other parts said slavery's bad. Well, are there any Christians today that are saying that slavery is okay? Another big one, not necessarily contradiction, but in the New Testament it says, like, wives, submit to your husband.
Mm-hmm.
And what about that? That's so terrible. It's like, well, what person is like abusing their wife?
There's also more to that statement.
Right. Yes. It's not, it's possibly an unfortunate choice of words in the translation.
But there's some, like, I don't know. I don't know that I'm going to look it up.
Well,
but it does tell the husbands not.
Yeah.
Like, there's more to that than
husbands respect your wives.
Yeah.
Like, it's explaining there's like a give and take in there, that it's a two-way street.
I just pulled it out. Ephesians 5:22-33. This is the New International Version. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is Savior. Now the church submits to Christ. Also, Okay, then it says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by washing the water through the word. I mean, it doesn't say, husbands, do whatever you want to your wife. She's your property. It says, treat your wife as Christ loved the church.
Yeah, so if you actually have a loving and good marriage, then there should be no concern about
issues
about respecting your wife and submitting to your husband.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's ironic because the intellectual LARPing that people do when they pull up that passage, it's like, man, you are really a shallow person if you can't figure out what's going on there.
As you keep reading, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does for the church. So that's not really saying your wife, is your property and you do with it.
That she's subordinate to you.
Beat her or, whatever.
Yeah.
Also, we're talking about different times. When this was written, we don't have, whatever.
Well, yeah, back then to be a widow,
I mean,
was
really,
really tough, because the husband had played a much different role. Men played the gender roles back then were much more defined.
Didn't have computers.
Right. So if you didn't have someone that was like physically strong and go out and earn a living the way that that you needed to back then it's going to be real rough. Because the women had important jobs of raising the kids and the families and taking care of all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Just like it would be difficult for a man to be a widower and to lose his wife back then, because he's got to go out and support his family, but he's going to be home taking care of the house and the kids. It's not a great situation either way.
Right.
But yeah, it's again, if any of these problems or contradictions that you want to bring up about Christianity were a thing, then yeah, you would have kind of an argument to say, yeah, this is a problem. But anytime that people point out these bad things about Christianity, they cherry pick from things in the Bible. Are there problems today because of it?
Maybe it's convenient that I'm a Catholic, or that we're Catholic, is that the church was there before Scripture was. So we're not, the faith was around before the Bible was, at least the New Testament, before it was all put together.
Right.
So we don't, I know there's Protestants out there who are sola scriptura, who go just off the word of the Bible, but as Catholics, we trace it back to Christ, and the church was there before the gospel. So there's a lot of tradition. It's not all scripture. There's scripture and tradition, which is a big difference, because we don't take the Bible literally word for word, as some sects of Christianity would do.
Right. But even the ones that do take the Bible literally word for word don't go around well, I just read this part of Leviticus, so therefore
Yeah.
I can go do this to this person.
Right. No, they don't. No. I mean, as far as I know, maybe there's someone. I don't know. But I don't think that's a big problem with, certain Protestant churches or any other sects of Christianity.
Right. So, I wrote a couple things down. I think we covered everything that I had. So
You want to bring up? Do you have a free market story?
I didn't think about this. Do you have one?
No, I don't. Well, I didn't think of one either. I've been very busy with work recently, and so.
No. So you work for the government?
Yeah.
Since there's no free market success stories happening there.
Yeah. Well, there are. I don't know where to go with it. Can tell you we had a pretty bad storm Halloween night and pulled a piece of siding off my house. So I'm gonna have to get that fixed. So we're gonna see how the free market comes together for me. Maybe that'll be my story for next week. See if I can get someone out there to repair it. And I don't know what goes into fixing siding. I guess you need the same color siding.
Yeah. Well, I kind of have, since we're on the topic of work and everything, I can have one. There's we had a vendor wanted to come in and talk to me and the maintenance manager about some materials they had, and so he brought his the kind of the technical person from their material supplier. It was for gaskets, so I don't have to just say random generalities. But they said, any sort of application that we need, we have questions on, that they'll just come in and, whether it's doing, measuring up or looking at it in the field, or supplying us with kind of some other technical expertise with, procedures on how to make up the joint. They're happy to supply it, and they're not charging extra for that. But what it does for them is that if they're making sure that we're using their products correctly and making sure that we have all of the information and the tools that we need in order to do that, then it makes sure that their product is going to operate the way it's intended to. Because they don't want a situation, and I've had this happen before in my job where I recommend some product or material, and it doesn't get installed right or something, and they're, oh, this stinks. And it's like, no, the installation stunk, but the product itself, like, you can't judge the product on a poor installation. So they're willing to put in a little bit extra in order to make sure that we do things correctly, so the product works as it is intended. As a result, obviously, the product's working help us as a company, since we're operating better and more reliably, and it helps the company selling it to us, because we'll probably go back to buy from them again. So it's a nice little extra thing they add in, and it's beneficial to both parties. So that's my little
very nice.
Yeah, market success story. And there's a lot of stuff out there. It's not just in industrial applications. That any sort of product or service you buy, you can probably call the company up if you have questions, and they'll give you some direction. And it's for all the same reasons that I just said for this gasket company.
I got a quick free market success story. I can cancel my subscription to DAZN because they delayed the Canelo Kovalev fight for over an hour and kept me up all night. And since it's the free market, and this is why I call it a success, if I don't want to continue to pay for that, I don't have to.
Yep.
So I'm not forced to do it. If I want to stay up and wait for a fight to start after 1 o'clock in the morning and pay for it, I can do that, or I don't have to.
Yep. It's a beautiful thing. So the show notes page for this episode is mcflugel.com/169. I don't think we really talked about anything other than mentioned in the previous episode, so I'll link to that there. And also check out libertymugs.com and also 10hoursofbitcoin.com. We are still taking donations for that, because we do have we're trying to think of a new little project to incentivize people in the Bitcoin world. So that's what the donations for 10hoursofbitcoin.com is for doing that stuff. We previously gave some to one of the guests here, Guy Swan of the Crypto Economy podcast, for some of his readings that we used for the lessons on the website, as a little thank you for the work he put in there. And also funds being used to identify some of the bad actors and attackers of Bitcoin historically. So we haven't announced, and we're still trying to figure out what the next thing is going to be. But based on what we're kind of milling around with, it should be pretty good and a worthwhile endeavor. So bottom of 10hoursofbitcoin.com, there's a little link to donate and send your money there. And also, it's a good resource if you're interested in Bitcoin. It is a great way to get yourself up on the economics and technical aspects. So if you know someone who's interested in learning about Bitcoin, or maybe it's yourself, just go over to 10hoursofbitcoin.com. So I think that's all I had, Slappy.
Yeah. Good stuff. I'm sure there's plenty of people who disagree with us on this episode. I'd be happy to hear from them. If you want to do an episode together, that's fine. If you want to come on, and if you're going to be a decent person about it, sure.
Yeah, we're obviously not able to cover every sort of.
Yeah, we're not covering everything. I'm sure you're sitting there thinking like, you're just totally missing the point. Well,
yeah, you missed this.
Let us know about it.
Yeah, we're always happy to talk about this stuff. So, all right, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Peace.